Just a little over a day after the tragic crash of Flight 752, a new message from Ottawa.
We have intelligence from multiple sources, including our allies and our own intelligence. The evidence indicates that the plane was shot down by an Iranian surface-to-air missile.
The government is calling for a full investigation and answers from Iran, a country Canada has no diplomatic ties with.
The first communication we had with the state of Iran was yesterday night.
So, how does this new information change the government's response? And how does it navigate this complicated situation?
So let's bring in at issue to answer some of those questions. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Althea Raj also in Montreal tonight. Good to see you all. These are such complicated issues for governments, but they can also be really defining issues for prime ministers and for leaders. So let's talk about some of the initial response we've seen from the government and from the prime minister in particular. Chantal, what have you made in terms of, I guess, particularly today with the evidence that the plane seems to have been shot down in terms of how they've handled it?
I think the government did not have much of a choice and made the best choice, which was to send back the Prime Minister to the microphones to confirm what was being confirmed left, right, and center by the time he showed up on various networks by the U.S. President. So the one choice was to try to say nothing while all this was happening, which doesn't sound like a palatable option, in the hope that this would keep doors open for sending inspectors and consular help to Iran, or to come clean with as much information as the country had. It's quite extraordinary for a prime minister in a news conference to use intelligence to say what Justin Trudeau said, and you have to think that it means that the government is confident that this information is solid.
Yeah, and the difficulty around, or I guess the carefulness with which he spoke, Andrew, speaks to the fact that, as Chantal said, he still wants people to get in there. He wants consular officials, he wants TSB officials to be able to get in there.
Yeah, we have no particular leverage over Iran. Clearly something terrible has been done here, whether it was intentional or not. If it was simply reckless and culpable in that regard, then someone has to answer for that. But the only way in which we can call anybody to account or even have a hope of doing that is if we can get all the facts and find out exactly what happened. He's in a position, unfortunately, of having to ask Iran and maybe appeal to the moral conscience of the international community to put pressure on Iran to do the right thing here, when their every instinct, as we've seen, is going to be to cover up and lie about this.
Althea, what did you make of how the government responded, more particularly today, when they sort of finally had to say, we have enough evidence for us to conclude this?
I don't know if it was surprising, but it was nice to see that the government was being transparent. I mean, so far we've seen them be, I think, transparent, cautious, collaborative. The Prime Minister has been on the phone with his counterparts, and also trying to create a little bit of distance between himself and the U.S. President, Donald Trump. It was surprising to hear him say that he thinks, well, the government believes that the plane was shot down by Iranian surface-to-air missiles, but I think that means that we probably will have more information as the days and weeks go on. At the same time, though, you do get a sense that the government wants to believe that this was an accident. Yeah. You heard the Prime Minister say that. You heard the Foreign Affairs Minister suggest, well, it could have been an accident. Everybody seems to want to believe that it was an accident, because I think they don't know what they would do if it wasn't.
Yeah, well, but the other thing is that before you go down the road of it's not an accident, no amount of examination of the plane will prove or disprove, because it goes to intent. You have to ask yourself about motive. And one of the reasons the Iran government has scrambled to say this hasn't happened and somehow lost in the shuffle of this tragedy is that a number of the people who died are Iranian nationals. Who were killed by their own government by accident or by design, and that is not something that the government that has just managed to mobilize public opinion behind it over the past few days wants to own up to in a hurry.
But to
Andrew-
Rosie's point,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that the fact that now you're seeing the government of Iran pushing back and saying, well, if you think that that's the conclusion, then show us the intelligence, that it's hard. It squeezes the government because the government is still like, we want to get consular officials in there. There are things that we were hoping to engage with. And at the same time, if you're going to be transparent with people, then that impacts your ability perhaps to help, grieving families.
I want to play a clip of my colleague David Cochran trying to press the Prime Minister on the fact that this chain of events started because of the United States.
How much responsibility does the United States bear for this tragedy?
The evidence suggests that this is the likely cause, but we need to have a full and complete and credible investigation to establish exactly what happened.
Andrew, your thoughts on that? Because we have, as you said before, virtually no leverage with Iran, and now we're in a very strange position with the United States as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a context to this. I'm not going to weep any tears for taking out somebody who was responsible for the deaths of thousands of people. Right. But I would like to think, and I would have wanted to have thought, that the President of the United States would have have thought this through to some extent, had some kind of strategic vision, had weighed the costs and the consequences, had the tactical dexterity to deal with events that arose from it. You can't have any confidence in this. Instead, what you have is what appears to have been the usual mixture of pique and public relations and everything else that went into this decision, with no thought to the consequences. And in that context, I think you can, while the primary responsibility has to rest with Iran and whoever made the decisions in Iran connected with this, I do think the President of the United States does share some of the responsibility, and it points to the larger context, which is our military and other kinds of relationships with the United States are predicated on the idea that there'll be some kind of responsible leadership in the White House. If we cannot have that confidence, if we have this kind of bull in a china shop there, then that has to cause us to rethink a lot of our relationships with the United States in this regard.
Chantal?
Regardless of the state of our relationship with the U.S., what happened to that plane would have happened. It didn't happen because we're allies of the United States. That would be very hard to fathom, given that for the most part, Iran lost its own citizens in the process. Yeah. So it actually proves no point. But I don't think that the Prime Minister needs to apportion blame to Donald Trump, because I think Canadian public opinion will do it without any help from the Prime Minister.
Althea?
I don't know if I can agree with Chantal on that, because we don't know why this happened or who's responsible. And so far we have seen that our relationship with the White House, we're being squeezed on China, and now possibly we're being squeezed with the U.S. fighting with Iran. And I think questions have to be asked about collateral damage in Canada's relationship with the White House.
I have 2 minutes left, but I do want to touch on the one thing that sort of struck me from the press conference, and that is the enormous amount of reach out that the Prime Minister has done over the past 48 hours to world leaders for advice, for help, to try and get into Iran. I mean, make of it what you will, but to me it seemed like an admission that he knows what he doesn't know at this stage in his job, and is willing to admit that in some ways. Maybe I'm going too far, but let me get your take on that, Chantal.
I don't think that it's he knows what he doesn't know, but he knows what he doesn't have. That is consular presence, boots on the ground, diplomatic relationships with Iran. On the other hand, it does help that Canada has a really good relationship with the Ukraine. I see it more as a way to avoid having Donald Trump giving the lead on all of this in as much as possible, and a kind of a disavowal of confidence in the U.S. leadership.
Andrew, am I giving him too much credit there? Or?
No, I would agree with the last point in particular. That this is going to have to be the modus operandi in a lot of these issues going forward. Is we just don't have the kind of U.S. leadership we would have had in the past. It's going to have to be our NATO partners, our other allies, working in concert with them and basically working around the United States.
Althea?
Canada doesn't want to stand alone, and I think that's what it will come down to. Whatever the results of the investigation are, we've heard Donald Trump suggest as well that he thinks this is an accident. But if the Netherlands, the European Commission, the UK believe that it was not an accident, and Canada does too, then we will be relying on partners to help back us up. And I think that you're seeing kind of, now that Asmaka is done, kind of the Trudeau Liberals moving back towards perhaps more traditional simpatico allies.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, everybody. A tough topic, but really important to talk the politics and the policy on a day like this. Thank you all. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. Look for it on any major podcast app and on our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.